Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Silent Fear. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it in your country? Have you shared my channel with your friends yet, or are you keeping these whispers all to yourself? Here we explore chilling true crime and eerie mysteries, stories that slip between fact and nightmare. Tonight I have another dark tale for you, the disturbing true crime of a quiet librarian who vanished without a trace. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that low, unsettling hum, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. You are slumped against the cold vinyl booth of a forgotten Los Angeles bar, the kind of place where the light is always dim and the music sounds like a cheap, scratched recording of a long-dead crooner. It's late. The hour when everything beautiful turns sticky and suspect. You're nursing a weak drink, and you can practically feel the history clinging to the threadbare upholstery, the history of cheap dreams and even cheaper betrayals. You glance at the mirror behind the bar, catching your own reflection sleepy, a little too pale, and you see her ghost standing next to you. Not a real ghost, of course, darling. Just the lingering, desperate image of Elizabeth Short, the aspiring actress whose name Hollywood would never forget, not because of her talent, but because of the way her life was brutally and dramatically extinguished. The case they called the Black Dahlia. This, you realize, is the very mainstream horror fact we're easing into tonight. The notorious, still unsolved 1947 murder that became the gruesome hallmark of Tinseltown's dark side. They say she was last seen alive right here, or maybe somewhere just like it. A smoky lounge, all velvet and broken promises. You can practically hear the clink of ice and the murmur of conversations that meant nothing, until one of them meant everything. She was 22, full of that aggressive optimism that Los Angeles specializes in crushing. And then she was gone, only to reappear as a shocking tableau. Her body surgically bisected, carefully drained of blood, a macabre piece of performance art left for the police. It makes you wonder about the last drink she had. Did she sip it slowly, anticipating a future that was about to be stolen? Or did she gulp it down, trying to numb the disappointment of another failed audition? You rub your eyes. All the police theories, all the true crime books, they all circle the same drain. The brutality was personal, professional, almost ritualistic. Researchers still argue whether the precise nature of the mutilation suggests an intimate connection to the medical field, a gruesome theory that's been debated for decades. Some say she was tortured by someone with surgical precision, others that it was simply a show of maximum depravity. It's comforting, isn't it? Thinking that only a doctor could be that meticulous, as if regular people aren't perfectly capable of absolute wickedness. And speaking of wickedly precise acts, you remember that obscure tidbit, that fringe horror tidbit you stumbled across while trying to find some actual peace tonight, the phenomenon of the silent watcher? It's not a person, not a ghost, but an old, chilling superstition. The belief that when a crime as visceral and public as the Dahlia's happens, it leaves behind an energetic vacuum. And in that vacuum, a perfectly silent, perfectly still entity forms, a being made entirely of the crime's unresolved fear. They say it lingers in the place the victim was last truly alive, simply watching eternally. You realize, with a dry, unsettling chuckle, that if the silent watcher is real, this bar is probably full of them tonight. Well, at least I'm not drinking alone, you mutter into your glass. That's your first darkly humorous joke for the night. The kind that barely qualifies as humor, the kind that just acknowledges the cosmic absurdity of your current situation. You push the thought away, but the feeling of being observed lingers, that cold, unsettling sensation that's always present when you dive this deep into the darkness. You finish your drink. She was looking for a break. You sigh, leaning closer to the microphone, your voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She certainly got one, didn't she? A permanent, very public one. A grim joke about the nature of fame and tragedy. The bartender, a tired man who looks like he's seen 1,000 secrets walk out the door, catches your eye. He doesn't smile, he just wipes down the already clean counter. You think about the countless suspects who were questioned in the Dahlia case, doctors, Hollywood big shots, petty criminals. Everyone wanted to be the one who knew the secret, the one who saw the last moments of the girl with the too bright smile. It reminds you of the lost hour theory some true crime enthusiasts adhere to. The idea that every major murder creates a tiny temporal distortion, a single hour of time that no witness can account for, a perfect blank space where the crime actually occurred. You can't help but think about how quiet that hour must have been. Just the killer, the victim, and the absolute silence of the universe saying nothing. You adjust the worn pillow behind your head, trying to get comfortable, trying to ignore the prickle on the back of your neck. It's just the darkness, you tell yourself, just the stories. But you recall the way the Dahlia's body was posed, the almost artistic quality of the arrangement. She wasn't just killed, she was presented. The police, you muse, running a finger along the rim of your glass. They spent years chasing shadows. If she'd only stayed home and done her needlepoint, she'd have lived to a ripe old age, completely forgotten. But no, she had to chase the spotlight. Your third dark joke. A commentary on the price of ambition. Maybe the true horror isn't the killer, but the idea that escaping obscurity requires such a terrible final sacrifice. You feel a profound sense of exhaustion now, the kind that comes from spending too much time breathing the stale air of old trauma. You can almost smell the formaldehyde and desperation in the room. You stand up slowly, letting the fictional cold air of the bar settle back into place. You leave the ghost of Elizabeth Short and the silent watcher behind you, stepping back out into the continuous dark. The air is thin, and the frost on the window pane looks like crystallized panic. You're no longer in that stale LA bar, you're miles away, figuratively and literally, perched high in the desolate, snow-whipped Ural Mountains of Russia in February 1959. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders, but the chill is deep, internal. It's the kind of cold that seems to come not from the weather, but from the impossible thing that happened here at Kolatsiakl, the Dead Mountain. We're talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident, that unsettlingly famous case that defies simple explanation. 9 experienced ski hikers, young, determined, prepared, set up camp, cut off from the world. You're picturing the scene, a sturdy tent pitched on the icy slope, the quiet hiss of a Primus stove, the sound of 9 people settling in for the night, everything normal. And then, everything is irrevocably, horrifically wrong. The mainstream scary fact here is the discovery itself. The tent was found abandoned, ripped open from the inside. You are peering into that dark, jagged hole now, seeing the frantic, panicked scramble. Footprints lead away from the tent, 9 sets of them, some barefoot, some wearing only socks, despite the S25C temperature. They didn't walk away, they fled. Fled from what? An avalanche? No, the evidence doesn't support it. The tent was still standing, the snow was undisturbed. You feel the cold dread of the unknown clinging to you. The bodies were found scattered, not from an impact, but from exposure. Yet, some had bizarre, non-fatal injuries. Crushed ribs, a fractured skull. Most disturbingly, one woman, Ludmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue and eyes. And some of their clothing, years later, registered high levels of radiation. Researchers still argue whether the high-frequency wind patterns in the area, a phenomenon known as the Kármán vortex street, could have created low-frequency infrasound that induced mass panic and compelled the hikers to flee the tent. It's a nicely clinical explanation for a situation that feels absolutely demonic, isn't it? As if sound waves alone can cause a person to run barefoot into a Siberian winter. You try to find some levity in the unbearable tension of the scene. You spot the mess kit near the remains of the fire. Well, I guess the only thing scarier than being ripped to shreds by an unknown entity is realizing you forgot the s'mores ingredients, you whisper, a dry, shivering, darkly humorous joke. The obscure horror tidbit that clings to this case is the local Mansi people's legend of the Menk. These are large, silent, humanoid creatures, the mountain spirits, who supposedly shun human intrusion and possess an unnatural strength. The locals claim that Kolatsiakl, or the Dead Mountain, earned its name because the Menk drove away everyone who tried to settle there. When the hikers fled, were they running from something monstrous, something local, or something other? You recall that strange detail we left behind in Section 1, the Silent Watcher, the entity of unresolved fear. If the Silent Watcher takes shape wherever deep, inexplicable terror occurs, imagine the collective dread that must have manifested on that slope when those 9 people realized they had to cut their way out of their only shelter. Maybe the thing they ran from wasn't an attacker, but an overwhelming sudden sense of absolute crippling panic. You settle deeper into your chair, feeling the weight of the endless frozen landscape. The idea of the lost hour is strong here too. That blank period of time where the mundane turned horrific. Did they see something? Did they feel something? You consider the logical explanations, a Russian military experiment, secret weapons, paradoxical undressing, and you shake your head. Radiation, crushed ribs, a missing tongue. It's like someone was aiming for the weirdest Yelp review of a camping trip possible, you murmur, a second darkly humorous joke. Seriously, if you're going to commit a perfect crime, at least make the injuries logically consistent. The most bizarre detail of the Dyatlov case, in your sleepy opinion, is the finding that several of the bodies were found in positions suggesting they were trying to climb trees, not running, but climbing, desperately seeking height, seeking a view over what? You close your eyes, picturing the hikers' last terrified moments. They died for the most frustrating reason possible, you state with a sigh. The only thing they achieved was giving a million internet sleuths something to do on a Saturday night. That's your third darkly humorous joke, a meta-commentary on the true crime industry's obsession with unsolvable cases. You pull the heavy blanket up to your chin, trying to warn yourself with the fact that you are safe, indoors, and the terrifying cold is only a memory. But the thought of 9 people tearing their way out of their own tent, sacrificing safety for a frantic barefoot sprint, leaves a chill that even the heaviest duvet can't dispel. The silence of the dead mountain follows you into the next section. The phone's dead silence is quickly replaced by something much louder, much more vibrant, and somehow infinitely more terrifying. The snow of Dyatlov Pass melting away, replaced by the humid, suffocating quiet of a small, middle American house, circa 1966. The only sound is the persistent, unsettling drone of the refrigerator motor, and suddenly, the sharp, jarring ring of the telephone. You flinch. It's too late for a polite call. You reluctantly lift the receiver, the plastic already warm and slightly greasy from disuse. A breathy, strained voice is on the other end. Not a natural breath, but the sound of someone trying too hard to seem normal. This is your introduction to the mainstream scary fact of this section, the infamous grinning man, also known as Indrid Cold. The voice on the line is overly cheerful, unnervingly enthusiastic, a kind of high-pitched manic sincerity that makes your skin crawl. He asks you a simple, generic question, maybe about the weather, or if you've had a nice day. But then, the conversation shifts, becoming hyper-specific, utterly inappropriate. He mentions the book you were just reading, the specific brand of coffee you drank this morning, or, most chillingly, the exact pattern of the stain on the living room rug. The common descriptions of Indrid Cold, often linked to the Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, paint him as impossibly tall, unnaturally smooth, skinned and always wearing a horrifyingly fixed childlike grin that never reaches his eyes. He is the ultimate telepathic stalker. Hello. Oh, you're wearing the blue slippers, the voice might chirp, completely uninvited. Did you forget about the silent watcher from the bar? Don't worry, I saw him too. He's very lonely. You try to hang up, but the receiver feels glued to your hand. His voice continues, too close, too loud. It's like listening to pure, unsettling data being broadcast with a layer of forced joy. The obscure horror tidbit woven into this is the concept of the echoing dialogue. It's a fringe theory that posits that entities like the grinning man don't actually see you in real time, but rather, they are tapping into the lingering fear residue left behind by past events. They are simply reading the echoes of your life, the way a recording loops. So when he mentions the blue slippers, he might be reading the echo of yesterday's terror, not tonight's. It's a terrifying comfort. He isn't watching you now. He's just watching everything you've ever done. You shiver, the thought linking back to the previous sections. Was he watching Elizabeth Short have her last drink? Was he observing the Dyatlov hikers cut their tent, seeing their panic sprint? It's a vast, impersonal voyeurism. Researchers still argue whether the grinning man sightings represent genuine extraterrestrial contact, a form of high-level psychological warfare carried out by the military, or simply a mass psychological delusion fueled by the Cold War paranoia of the 1960s. The debate always boils down to one question. Is he a man, an alien, or a bad mood made manifest? You try to find a way to break the tension. The voice on the line is still talking about your mundane routine. He sounds like a customer service agent who just got an hour of sleep and is trying to hit his quota. You think to yourself, a third-rate, darkly humorous joke for your benefit. The kind of guy who calls you at dinner just to talk about your extended car warranty. You remember the feeling of the silent watcher in the bar, in the lost hour on the mountain. Maybe the grinning man is the operator of the lost hour, the one who sets the scene and orchestrates the panic, giving everyone a cheerfully terrifying little send-off. "You know," the voice coos, "I saw those poor people on the mountain. They were so confused. They should have just waited for the sunrise. It's always better in the morning, except for the frostbite, of course." He laughs, a brittle, dry, joyless sound. This is your first darkly humorous joke aimed at the caller. You're fighting his power with absolute absurdity. You finally manage to yank the cord from the wall. Silence. A blessed, complete silence. The only problem is, the cheerful voice is still echoing in your head, a phantom dial tone. Gotta love a guy who respects your privacy so much he waits until you've disconnected him to keep talking. You sigh, your second darkly humorous joke. You feel a profound sense of violation. He didn't threaten you. He didn't even do anything, really. He just proved that the world's surface of privacy and isolation is a paper-thin lie, and someone, somewhere, is always on the other side, beaming a terrifying, unnatural smile. And you realize he knows where you are. Not just the town, not just the house, but the dark corner you're huddled in right now. The phone's dead silence is quickly replaced by something much louder, much more vibrant, and somehow infinitely more terrifying. You're swept away from the grinning man's cold familiarity into the smoky, humid heat of New Orleans, specifically the year 1909. The air here isn't just warm, it's thick with the smell of cheap tobacco, stale perfume, and something coppery that you don't want to think about. The sound is the mainstream scary fact for this section, the insistent, mournful, yet ultimately triumphant music of a jazz funeral procession. But this isn't a funeral, it's a desperate plea. You are walking the cobblestone streets, avoiding the shadows of the French Quarter, because this is the era of the Axeman of New Orleans. A brutal, seemingly random serial killer who used an axe or a razor to break into homes and attack the occupants, leaving a trail of bloodshed and panic in his wake. The attacks were chaotic, unpredictable, striking Italian, American grocery owners and citizens alike. The killer achieved maximum notoriety when he sent a terrifying letter to the local papers, which is what we're focusing on tonight. You can read the infamous line in your mind's eye, "I am not a human being, but a spirit, a demon from the hottest hell." Dramatic, yes, but effective. The letter contained a chilling musical caveat, a lifeline thrown from the abyss of a killer's mind. The Axeman declared he would continue his rampage through the city, but he would spare any house where a jazz band was playing on the night of March 19th, 1919. He loved jazz, you see. The music, he claimed, was the only thing that could pacify his demonic urges. So, on that appointed night, every venue, every house, every dance hall in New Orleans exploded with frantic, desperate music. People who had never touched an instrument were playing gramophones loudly. They were hosting spontaneous parties, filling the dark streets with a cacophony of ragtime and Dixieland, a city literally playing music for its life. The obscure horror tidbit here is the local superstition of the musician's bargain. It's the unsettling belief that in the darkest corners of New Orleans, music doesn't just entertain, it protects. It's a non-human entity itself, a kind of sonic charm. People believed that if a spirit was haunting you, playing music loudly enough would force the spirit to listen, distracting it from its malice. The Axeman's demand then wasn't just a sick game, it was an accidental tapping into a deep, local truth. You shiver, the rhythm of a distant trombone thrumming in your chest. Researchers still argue whether the Axeman's musical threat was a genuine psychological compulsion, a clever ruse to shift the investigation away from certain neighborhoods, or simply a macabre publicity stunt that unexpectedly worked. It's a wonderful debate, isn't it? Was the killer a man, a demon, or a performance artist? You find yourself humming along to the tune, a nervous smile flickering across your face. Well, that's one way to boost ticket sales on a Tuesday night, you whisper, your first darkly humorous joke. The sheer absurdity of an entire city throwing a party to save its own neck. You recall the grinning man from the last section with his forced cheerfulness and unnaturally wide smile. Did the Axeman ever call the grinning man? Was the grinning man a fan of the Axeman's music? Did he call him up just to say, "Hey, great letter, but that trombone solo felt a little flat"? The night of March 19th passed without a single attack. The Axeman kept his word. For one night, the power of a lively C major 7th chord was stronger than the drive to kill. You lean back, feeling the oppressive heat of the room. Imagine being a neighbor who hated jazz, you muse. You'd have to choose between a dull, quiet death and a ridiculously loud life. What a dilemma. Your second darkly humorous joke, a commentary on the price of survival in the face of musical terror. You hear the distant, melancholy wail of the saxophone, a reminder that the music worked. The axeman did eventually stop his killings, just as abruptly as he started them, and was never caught. The music saved New Orleans. Next time I'm hiding from a phantom killer, I'm not locking the doors, you state, feeling the sleepiness start to creep back in. I'm just going to fire up the Spotify playlist. Volume way up. That's your third, and perhaps most practical, darkly humorous joke. A modern solution to an ancient, terrifying problem. But you know better, don't you? The music might save you from the Axeman, but it will do nothing against the cold, silent scrutiny of the silent watcher, still lurking in the shadows of your room. The Dixieland music fades, replaced by the relentless, monotonous clicking of a typewriter. You are now in the chilly, fog-drenched atmosphere of Northern California, spanning the late 1960s and early 1970s. The oppressive heat of New Orleans is gone, replaced by a cold, intellectual dread. The mainstream scary fact of this section is the infamous Zodiac Killer. He wasn't like the Axeman, who loved attention and jazz. The Zodiac was a meticulous, taunting presence, a master manipulator who chose the press as his primary victim. His preferred weapon was not a gun or a knife, but a pen. You are hunched over a desk, staring at one of his infamous handwritten letters, the paper slightly yellowed, the penmanship oddly neat, professional, almost academic. This isn't just a confession, it's a declaration of superiority. The Zodiac didn't just want to kill people. He wanted to prove he was the smartest person in the room or the state. The core horror here is the ciphers. Cryptograms he sent to the newspapers. The 408 cipher, the 340 cipher daring the police and the public to decode his identity and, chillingly, his future plans. You run your fingers over the intricate, meaningless symbols, the feeling of the paper linking you directly to the killer's cold, calculating mind. It's a cruel, high-stakes intellectual game, and you are playing along. He was active right after the Dyatlov Pass incident, a decade of cosmic coldness linking the two. You recall the grinning man with his unnervingly precise knowledge. Was the Zodiac simply a more grounded version of that entity, trading telepathy for the tedious process of writing? Or perhaps the silent watcher followed the Zodiac too, lingering near the post boxes he used, observing the sheer arrogance of the man as he mailed his gruesome homework. Researchers still argue whether the Zodiac Killer, by creating a brand-name persona through media manipulation and cryptic language, actually influenced the subsequent wave of serial killer documentation and the popular cultural image of the methodical genius murderer. Did he invent the archetype or simply perfect it? The debate is less about who he was and more about what he became to the public imagination. You squint at the seemingly random jumble of letters and symbols. It's supposed to spell out his name, his motive, his secret. You can't decipher it, of course. No one really could, not entirely. It's designed to frustrate, to prove that his mind operates on a plane you can't reach. You let out a sleepy, sarcastic yawn. He put this much effort into his writing, you'd think he'd at least submit it to a proper literary journal. You muse, your first darkly humorous joke. The killer is the ultimate attention-seeking creative writing student. The obscure horror tidbit here is the folklore concept of the psychic echo. This suggests that when a person is deeply focused on a malicious act, especially a repetitive one like creating ciphers, their intent leaves a psychic imprint on the object itself. When you handle the letters, you aren't just holding paper, you are holding a tiny piece of the killer's focused evil. This echo isn't meant to scare you, it's meant to compel you, to drag your mind into his obsessive pattern. You notice a detail in the letter, a strange flourish on the letter K. It reminds you of the Axeman's distinct love for music, a specific, recognizable signature. The Zodiac's signature is his cipher, a promise that the puzzle will always be more important than the victims. You pick up a heavy, old reference book and tap the spine, your eyelids getting heavier. If he really wanted to prove he was the smartest guy around, he should have just sent an accurately filled-out tax return, you whisper, your second darkly humorous joke. Now that is the true mark of a criminal genius. You feel the cold, meticulous nature of the man settling over you. He wasn't driven by passion or hunger. He was driven by the desire to win a game you didn't even know you were playing. You closed the book with a sigh, the pages smelling of old paper and dust. The Zodiac never finished his final cipher, you remind yourself, a sleepy smile twitching on your face. I guess that means he failed to meet his deadline. Total amateur. That's your third darkly humorous joke, a critique of the killer's lack of professional follow-through. You leave the ciphers and the relentless clicking behind, feeling the lingering weight of a puzzle that wasn't meant to be solved, only to be feared. The cold, calculating focus of the Zodiac's gaze now becomes your own tired, searching look in the dark. You recoil from the cryptic letters of the Zodiac, the icy calculation replaced by a terrifying, inexplicable heat. You are now sitting in a dusty library or perhaps just a quiet room surrounded by old medical journals and crime reports, sifting through the most unnerving of all forensic mysteries, spontaneous human combustion, SHC. This is the mainstream scary fact. Cases where a human body, or sometimes just a part of it, turns into a pile of clean, greasy ash without an obvious external source of ignition. You read the details, your own skin starting to prickle with a nervous warmth. The victims are often found in their homes, fully incinerated, yet the surrounding furniture, the paper on the walls, and sometimes even the clothes on their feet are left untouched. The sheer internal precision of the fire is what makes the whole thing a masterpiece of horror. You are focusing on a 1951 case, a woman named Mary Reeser in St. Petersburg, Florida. She was found almost entirely reduced to ash, save for a foot and a small part of her backbone. The armchair she sat in was destroyed, but the newspaper next to her was barely scorched. It's an impossible, terrifying scenario. It suggests that the fire came from within. You pull your sleeves down, suddenly overly conscious of your own internal temperature. The contrast between this internal furnace and the external coldness of the Dyatlov Pass is striking. Those hikers froze outside their tent, while these victims seem to have boiled inside their own skin. Researchers still argue whether SHC is a genuine but extremely rare metabolic or atmospheric phenomenon, or if all cases can be explained by the wick effect, the theory that human body fat, once ignited by an external ember, like a discarded cigarette, acts like the wax of a candle, with the victim's clothing acting as the wick. The debate is simple. Is your body a furnace or just a slow-burning candle? The obscure horror tidbit here is the ancient superstition of the internal rot. This is the belief that a person who has committed a grave, deeply hidden sin, an act of malice that only the silent watcher would know about, develops a kind of toxic internal corruption. Over years, this corruption becomes volatile, eventually leading to a purification by fire, a final, total judgment that burns from the soul outward. It's a poetic, terrifying form of divine punishment. You think of the Zodiac meticulously charting his crimes. Did he have an internal rot? Did Elizabeth Short? Was the Axeman simply ahead of his time, using an external fire and axe to avoid the internal one? You lean back, feeling a wave of exhaustion. You know, if you're going to spontaneously combust, at least be considerate and do it outside. You sigh, your first darkly humorous joke. The cleanup bill alone is terrifying. You know, if the accounts describe the remains as smelling strange, sweet, smoky, and oily. You wrinkle your nose in imagined disgust. You try to remember a logical explanation, any logical explanation. The grinning man's cold, disembodied voice comes back to you. It's always better in the morning, except for the frostbite, of course. And for the total lack of a body, you mentally add. You realize the victims of SHC never had a chance to escape. Unlike the Dyatlov hikers who had a terrifying panicked sprint, the fire came for these people in their quietest, most vulnerable moments. Well, the one bright side is that they definitely didn't have to worry about funeral costs. You whisper, a second darkly humorous joke. A practical joke about the finality of total incineration. The body is gone, reduced to an unsolvable riddle. The notion of the psychic echo from the last section feels irrelevant here. There's no cipher, no letter, no taunting message. Just heat, ash, and a profound, total silence. A crime with no killer, just a very, very unfortunate victim. If I ever catch on fire, you conclude, yawning widely. Just assume I finally found out the answer to one of these cases and my brain overheated. It'd be the only logical explanation left. Your third darkly humorous joke, a final, self-deprecating comment on the exhaustion of trying to understand the inexplicable. You drift away from the scent of ash, the heat of the internal fire fading. You need a colder, quieter case now, one with walls and shadows, one where the terror is external, visible, and deeply, dreadfully human. The internal fire fades completely, replaced by a profound, rural silence. You are standing in the middle of a remote, snow-covered field in Bavaria, Germany in the year 1922. The quiet is so thick it feels like a physical weight on your chest. The only structure nearby is a small, isolated farmhouse, Hinterkaifeck. This is the setting for the mainstream scary fact of the section, one of the most chilling, well-documented, and utterly unsolvable German true crime cases. 6 members of the Gruber family. An elderly couple, their widowed daughter, her 2 small children, and the new maid were brutally murdered in one night. The terrifying part is the complete, overwhelming silence that surrounded the act. You walk toward the silent farmhouse. You know the unsettling details. Days before the murders, the farmer, Andreas Gruber, noticed footprints in the fresh snow leading from the woods toward the house, but none leading away. He found his house keys missing. The maid, just a few hours into her new job, complained that the house felt haunted. On the night of the murders, the family was lured one by one into the barn and killed with a pickaxe. The new maid was killed in her bedroom. Then the killer, or killers, stayed. This is the core, terrifying truth. The killer was in the house for at least 3 days after the murders. The neighbors noticed smoke from the chimney. Someone had fed the livestock. Someone had eaten the food in the kitchen. Someone had even played with the toddler's toys. The smell of stale coffee, a detail noted by the later investigation, clings to the air. You rub your eyes, trying to comprehend this protracted, unnerving presence. Unlike the quick, chaotic flight from the Dyatlov Pass, or the total final burn of SHC, this was a deliberate, drawn-out act of sustained domestic intrusion. Researchers still argue whether the killer was a lone, calculating individual who was intimately familiar with the family's routine, or if the multiple blunt force injuries suggest a shared crime carried out by a small group of attackers. The debate hinges on the motive, theft, revenge, or a simple, terrifying need for shelter. You look around the lonely field, and the obscure horror tidbit from the last section comes creeping back, the psychic echo. If the Zodiac left an echo on his paper, imagine the psychic silent residue left in the house by the killer who lived with his victims' bodies for 3 days. The sheer, silent arrogance of that act. This is what links you back to the Silent Watcher, the entity of unresolved fear from Section 1. The Watcher, you realize, didn't have to work hard here. The killer became the Watcher, lingering, observing the silence he had created. You step into the kitchen, the scent of stale coffee clinging to the wood. You force a tired, nervous laugh. "Well, that's just rude," you whisper, your first darkly humorous joke. If you're going to stay for 3 days, at least clean up the mess and buy a new bag of coffee. You feel the cold, heavy realization that the killer never rushed. He took his time. He was comfortable. It reminds you of the grinning man's casual familiarity, the way he seemed to know your life without ever being invited in. You picture the killer doing the farm chores, listening to the livestock, waiting for, what? A feeling of satisfaction, a chance to slip away. You yawn, feeling the sleepiness pull at you again. The police should have checked the classifieds, you muse, running your finger over the dusty kitchen table. They missed the chance to arrest the world's most dedicated house sitter. Your second darkly humorous joke, reducing a profound tragedy to an absurd domestic scenario. You recall the family's old German shepherd dog, found whimpering but unharmed. The killer didn't touch the dog. You wonder what the dog saw in those 3 days of profound, unsettling silence. You turn away from the silence of the farm, feeling the oppressive weight lift. Honestly, you conclude, feeling truly exhausted. After that long in a house of the dead, you'd think the killer would at least leave a little thank you note on the fridge. Zero manners. That's your third darkly humorous joke. A final absurd wish for common courtesy from a monster. The Hinterkaifeck case remains the epitome of the unseen killer, a shadow that lingered, proving that the most terrifying thing isn't the act of murder, but the quiet, everyday aftermath. You close your eyes, hoping to outrun that lingering, stale smell. You are no longer wandering through the dust and stale coffee of Hinterkaifeck. You are right where you started, in your own bed, but something is profoundly wrong. The transition from the Bavarian farmhouse was too seamless, too abrupt. You open your eyes, and you are utterly, completely paralyzed. This is the mainstream scary fact, sleep paralysis. That moment when your brain wakes up before your body, trapping you in a state of conscious helplessness. You can't move a muscle, you can't scream, and your room, which seconds ago felt safe and familiar, now seems vast and threatening. You try to roll over, to twitch a finger, but your muscles refuse to obey. The pressure on your chest is immense, a physical weight that makes breathing shallow and ragged. This feeling of being utterly pinned is the horror itself. And then, in your peripheral vision, you see it, the familiar, yet always terrifying form of the shadow person. This is the obscure horror tidbit, the common hallucination associated with sleep paralysis. The figure isn't defined, it's a perfect silhouette, a distortion of the light, but it possesses a profound, palpable malice. It could be tall, like the grinning man you spoke to on the phone. It could be small, like the dark, lingering echo of the interkaifek killer. But it is always there, waiting just outside the circle of your vision. You realize the shadow person is the literal manifestation of the silent watcher we discussed earlier. It is the entity made entirely of unresolved fear, now focused entirely on you, sitting at the foot of your bed, doing precisely what it does best, watching. You recall the Dyatlov Pass hikers, running barefoot from something in the night. What if they weren't running from a menk or an avalanche, but from a shared, sudden onset of sleep paralysis? A collective nightmare that compelled them to burst out of their tent. Researchers still argue whether the shadow people phenomenon is solely a product of hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations, the visual activity that occurs as you fall asleep or wake up, or if it represents a genuine yet unexplained cross-cultural experience of a dark entity. Is it a neurochemical glitch, or is it a visitation? You're trying to scream the former, but you're feeling the latter. The shadow person begins to slowly slide from the periphery into your direct line of sight. You try to focus, to break the spell. You want to laugh, to dismiss it, but the terror is too complete. You force a thought, a desperate attempt at your brand of dry, dark humor. Well, at least I don't have to worry about running into him at the grocery store tomorrow, you think. Your first darkly humorous joke. He seems like a strictly nocturnal creature. The pressure on your chest increases. The figure looms closer. You are completely at its mercy. This helplessness is a terrifying contrast to the Zodiac's meticulous control and the Axeman's violent agency. Here, you have no agency at all. You manage a tiny internal gasp, a silent, frustrated scream. You know, if you're going to just stand there, you could at least grab me a glass of water. You mentally negotiate your second darkly humorous joke. This whole paralysis thing is making me terribly thirsty. You remember the quiet permanence of the Hinterkaifeck killer, the way he just stayed. This shadow person feels the same. It is not going anywhere. It is home. With a final, exhausting mental push, you try to find the absolute absurdity in the situation. I appreciate the commitment to the silhouette look, you muse, feeling a terrible wave of exhaustion washing over you. It's very dramatic, but maybe consider some accessories. A Johnny hat, perhaps. Your third darkly humorous joke, a critique of the entity's fashion choices. The figure stops, completely still, looming over you. You are breathing, but you are not living. You are simply waiting. The terror of the paralysis is not the entity, but the knowledge that you can do absolutely nothing to stop the moment when it finally reaches you. It is the purest form of absolute silent surrender, and then, as suddenly as it began, your fingers twitch. You take a deep, ragged breath. The figure is gone, you are alone, and you are exhausted. The breathlessness of the sleep paralysis fades, replaced by the damp, chilling air of a London alley. You've been thrown from your own bedroom and into the oppressive, gas-lit gloom of Whitechapel, 1888. The air is thick with a choking, mustard-yellow fog, the kind that swallows sound and makes every corner a potential trap. This is the setting for the mainstream scary fact, Jack the Ripper. But we're not focusing on the victim's gruesome end, because the real terror here is the atmosphere. It's the psychological horror of the fog, the knowledge that an unseen, untouchable predator is operating with impunity in the heart of a great city. You are hurrying down a cobbled street, the dense London fog closing in. You can hear the distant, muffled sound of a cab, but the air is too heavy for the sound to carry clearly. This fog is the Ripper's accomplice. It provides the perfect blend of cover and isolation. You are never truly alone, but you can never truly see who is with you. The Ripper wasn't like the methodical Zodiac, sending ciphers, or the musical Axeman, announcing his presence. The Ripper was a shadow, a whisper, a fleeting shape in the mist. The terror is less about the gore and more about the absolute absence of an escape, the knowledge that the street lamps provide light, but not safety. You recall the Hinterkaifeck killer who lingered in the dark. The Ripper didn't linger. He struck and vanished. But the feeling is the same, the sense of an intelligent, malicious presence sharing your space. Researchers still argue whether Jack the Ripper was a trained surgeon or butcher due to the precise nature of some of the mutilations, or if this perception was simply exaggerated by the sensationalist press of the time, desperate for a narrative that made the killer seem more theatrical. The debate constantly swings between a desperate local man and a highly skilled aristocratic menace. The obscure horror tidbit here is the concept of the Whitechapel Whistlers. This was a local superstition that if you whistled a particular non-melodious tune in the thickest of the fog, it would briefly thin the mist around you, creating a small, temporary pocket of visibility. It was a desperate, tiny act of defiance against the overwhelming power of the environment. A superstition born of total helplessness. You try to whistle, but your throat is too dry with fear. You look back. You can't see anything clearly, just the orange halo of the gaslight. Did you see a figure, or was it just the shadow of a passing carriage? You are alone, but you feel the weight of the shadow person's gaze, an entity of pure, formless malice that could easily be hiding in the swirling mist. You feel a wave of complete, sleep-deprived exhaustion. You lean against a cold brick wall, pulling your cloak or your blanket tighter. You know, if you're going to be a notorious serial killer, you mutter, your first darkly humorous joke, you should at least invest in a more reliable stage name. Jack the Ripper's a bit on the nose, isn't it? The fog makes you feel like you are walking through the lost hour, that temporal void where the crime takes place without witnesses. The entire district seems to be trapped in an extended, endless lost hour. You adjust your focus, trying to see past the gaslight glare. The biggest mystery of the Ripper case, you muse, forcing a tiny, tired smile, is how the killer kept his coat so clean in this weather. Now, that's terrifying. Your second darkly humorous joke, a focus on the absurdity of immaculate clothing in a gruesome setting. You recall the desperate musical protection used against the Axeman. There's no music here, only the damp, suffocating quiet broken by your quick, shallow breaths. You pull yourself away from the wall, urging your tired legs forward. He was famous for writing those letters to the papers, you whisper. If he were around today, he'd just be a guy arguing with people in the YouTube comments about his body count. Much less dramatic. Your third darkly humorous joke, a commentary on the modern dilution of historical terror. You leave the fog and the relentless, unseen terror of Whitechapel behind you, but the sense of total, suffocating isolation remains. You feel cold, you feel tired, and you feel the weight of a gaze that the fog could never fully conceal. The London fog dissipates, and you are now looking at a house that is too big, too beautiful, and far too expensive. You are standing on the lawn of 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey, the site of the contemporary, unsettling mainstream scary fact, the Watcher House. You have just moved in. You have unpacked your boxes, hung your pictures, and breathed that first satisfying sigh of relief that comes with a fresh start. And then the mail arrives. The horror isn't a break-in or a murder. It's a letter. It's anonymous, handwritten, and immediately profoundly disturbing. The writer calls himself the Watcher. You hold the letter in your hand, the paper thin and cold. The words are what chills you to the bone. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. The letters are increasingly personalized, referring to the ages of your children, the specific layout of the rooms, and the family's movements. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Have they found what is in the walls yet? This is the terror, the certainty of being observed, not just by a person, but by a malevolent generational legacy. The letter suggests you haven't bought a house, you've been purchased. You are now part of the house's permanent dark history. The name, the Watcher, links directly back to the very first section and the silent watcher of the Black Dahlia. The unnamed entity of unresolved fear has found a new name and a new address, making its silence verbal, its scrutiny written. You glance nervously at the surrounding homes. Could it be a neighbor, an angry relative of the former owners, a bored, exceptionally creepy teenager? Researchers still argue whether the motive behind the Watcher letters was a failed attempt to extort money from the buyers, a petty neighborhood dispute taken to an extreme psychological level, or a genuine, deep-seated belief by the writer that the house itself has a dark, possessive history that requires constant monitoring. The debate pits common criminality against profound local psychosis. The obscure horror tidbit here is the concept of the familiar house, the architectural belief that certain houses possess a kind of innate psychic memory and they will only allow certain families to stay. The house doesn't just hold history, it chooses its occupants, often based on who can best continue its particular form of suffering. The watcher's letters are the house's voice, reminding you that you are temporary, but the watching is eternal. You recall the grinning man's impossible precise knowledge of your mundane life. The watcher seems to have the same ability, only he's confining his terror to a single beautiful suburban street. You try to find a moment of dark levity, rubbing your tired eyes. Well, at least someone thinks I'm interesting enough to stalk, you mutter, a small, weary smile on your face. That's your first darkly humorous joke, a self-deprecating comment on the sheer exhaustion of being a target. You crumple the letter slightly, but the words remain burned into your memory. He's probably a terrible neighbor, you sigh, always complaining about the lawn, and his letters are never on decent stationery. Your second darkly humorous joke, a critique of the stalker's lack of social grace and quality of materials. You feel the cold certainty that the killer from Hinterkaifeck, who simply stayed with the bodies, would have loved this house. The watcher seems to be a resident without a key, a killer whose weapon is the absolute destruction of your peace of mind. You look up at the beautiful large windows of 657 Boulevard. If the house needs young blood, he could just sign up for the Red Cross, you whisper, feeling the exhaustion of fear and sleepiness pull at you. A much easier way to get what he wants. Your third darkly humorous joke, a final absurd suggestion for a non-violent alternative to his terrifying requests. You leave the perfect suburban facade behind, the house standing silent and judged, ready to consume its next unhappy owner. The terror of the watcher is the knowledge that the fear isn't coming from outside your home. It's coming from a darkness that already considers your home its own. The quiet suburban dread of the watcher house shatters, replaced by the deep, oppressive heat and the smell of old wood and sulfur. You are transported to a small, isolated southern homestead in Adams, Tennessee in the early 1800s, the infamous setting of the Bell Witch haunting. This is the mainstream scary fact, a sustained, documented case of a malicious verbal poltergeist that tormented the family of John Bell from 1817 to 1821. This wasn't a shadow in the corner or a few mysterious noises. This was an intelligent, aggressive entity that communicated, cursed, and physically assaulted the family members. It's the ultimate, verifiable domestic haunting. You are sitting in the small, dark parlor, and the air is alive with the sounds of scratching, invisible slaps, and the terrifying, chittering voice of Kate, as the spirit called itself. The entity spoke, sang hymns, debated scripture, and delivered a chilling, specific curse upon John Bell and his family. The curse became reality, eventually leading to John Bell's death. A death some believe was directly administered by the witch. This is the terrifying distinction. The Bell Witch was a named, active persecutor, a ghost with an agenda. Unlike the formless silent watcher of the Dahlia case, or the distant written threats of the watcher in New Jersey. She was present, vocal, and totally inescapable. Researchers still argue whether the Bell Witch phenomenon was a true case of poltergeist activity, a ghost manifesting physical force, or if it was a complex case of mass hysteria and manipulation, potentially started by one of the Bell children. The debate pits the supernatural against the psychological, forcing you to wonder if the deepest malice can come from within the family unit itself. You feel the oppressive heat and hear the invisible slaps. You remember the shadow person who held you down during sleep paralysis. The witch seems to be the fully verbalized, completely active version of that paralyzing malice, a paralysis delivered with a sneer. The obscure horror tidbit here is the belief in the lingering scorn. This suggests that when a powerful curse or demonic entity is focused on a specific lineage, it doesn't just torment the individuals, it creates a pocket of spiritual toxicity around their land. Even after the family is gone, the scorn remains, a kind of localized, perpetual bad luck that traps all subsequent inhabitants. You are now standing on that toxic land. You try to find some levity in the overwhelming chaos. The spirit was known to constantly quote the Bible, often mid-attack. You know, for a demonic entity, you mutter, a small, tired laugh escaping you. She had a surprisingly structured curriculum. Very impressive. Your first darkly humorous joke, a reference to the witch's strange religious habit. You close your eyes, trying to focus on the sleepiness, trying to filter out the noise. The witch's voice is sharp, cutting. It reminds you of the grinning man's forced cheerfulness, only this voice is purely, aggressively hateful. You think of the poor new maid at Hinterkaifeck who complained the house felt haunted. She got a pickaxe to the head. The maid at the Bell House had it far worse. She was tormented verbally and physically until she fled. I bet the tax assessors love dealing with this place, you sigh, your head heavy on the pillow. Imagine trying to get a fair market value on a house with an actively cursing poltergeist. Your second darkly humorous joke, a classic blend of domestic banality and profound terror. You realize the core terror of the witch she promised she would return. She placed her curse, ensured John Bell's death, and then left, but not without the promise of a sequel. You feel the exhaustion of confronting such a sustained personal hatred. Honestly, if I were the Bell Witch, you whisper, pulling the blanket up to your chin, I would just haunt their credit score. That's a much more effective and modern way to ruin a family. That's your third darkly humorous joke, a final, updated version of a centuries-old terror. You let the sound of the invisible, malicious voice recede, leaving the cursed land and the enduring scorn behind. The witch's final chilling promise that she would be back in 7 years lingers in the air, a threat that time itself cannot diminish. The sulphurous, angry presence of the Bell Witch fades into the sound of crashing waves and the quiet, dry rattle of sand. You are standing on Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia in 1948. The air is warm, the night is silent, and the only thing of note is the perfectly preserved body of a well-dressed man found slumped against the sea wall. This is the mainstream scary fact, the Tamam Shud mystery, also known as the case of the Somerton Man. The case isn't famous for its brutality, but for its absolute, complete, and total lack of identity. You are leaning over the man's still, composed face. He was dressed in a suit, well cared for, no identifying labels on his clothing, no wallet, no cash. His dental records were useless. His fingerprints yielded nothing. He carried absolutely nothing that could link him to a name, a country, or a life. It's the ultimate clean slate, and therefore the ultimate mystery. The horror is the void he left behind. He simply materialized on a beach, a perfect zero of a man. The key detail, and the chilling focus, is the phrase found on a tiny, tightly rolled scrap of paper discovered in a hidden fob pocket stitched into his trousers. The phrase was... You stare at the tiny slip of paper. It's a note from the void, an elegant literary sign-off to a life that seemingly never existed. You realize this is the opposite of the Zodiac's taunting ciphers. The Zodiac desperately wanted to be known. The Somerton Man meticulously removed every shred of his identity. Researchers still argue whether the Tamam Shud mystery represents a high-level espionage operation, a secret agent liquidated by a foreign power, or if the man was simply a broken-hearted individual who staged his own death with meticulous care, wanting to exit the world with a deliberate, literary flourish. The debate pits James Bond against a tragic philosophical poet. You recall the lost hour theory, the temporal distortion where a crime happens without witnesses. This entire life seems to be one long lost hour, culminating in a final, silent moment on a beach. The obscure horror tidbit here is the belief in the final word's power. This suggests that certain phrases taken from powerful literary or historical texts have the ability to enact a profound metaphysical change. By uttering or carrying the final phrase of a great work, the Somerton Man may have been trying to make his non-existence official, an attempt to erase his life not just from police records, but from the universe itself. You look at the neat suit and the calm expression on the dead man's face. Well, he's certainly committed to the minimalist aesthetic, you observe, your first darkly humorous joke. No wallet, no ID, just a literary reference. Very pretentious. You think of the Hinterkaifeck killer who simply blended in with the house's routine. The Somerton Man simply blended into the background of a public beach, a perfect, unnoticeable transition into oblivion. You yawn, feeling the sleepiness heavy on your eyelids. He could have saved everyone a lot of trouble, you muse, rubbing your neck. If you're going to use a cryptic clue, at least use a gift card number, something useful. Your second darkly humorous joke, a commentary on the uselessness of the clue. You consider the grinning man's impossible knowledge. Did he know the Somerton man? Did he try to call him before he vanished, just to say, "I see you're planning a trip to the beach. Did you remember your ID?" You look at the beach, the waves endlessly erasing the sand. The one thing we know for sure, you conclude, the fatigue making your voice a low, dry rasp, is that he failed to meet the required word count for his final chapter. Total rewrite necessary. Your third darkly humorous joke, a final, writerly critique of the ultimate dead-end mystery. You turn your back on the silent man, the beach, and the final word. The terror of Tamam Shud isn't in what he suffered, but in the overwhelming sense of nothingness he achieved, a perfect void where a life used to be. The profound nothingness of the Tamam Shud mystery is suddenly replaced by the sound of scuttling, squeaking, and a high-pitched mocking voice that seems to come from behind the wall. You are transported to a remote farm on the Isle of Man in the 1930s. This is the mainstream scary fact for the section, the story of Geff the Talking Mongoose. The Irving family, who lived on the secluded farm, claimed to be hosts to an invisible, hyper-intelligent creature they called Geff, who lived in the walls. Geff was famously described as a mongoose, a small, quick mammal, but he acted like a foul-mouthed, chatty poltergeist. You are sitting in the farmhouse, trying to get comfortable, while the high, reedy voice of Geff scolds you for something completely trivial. He sang, complained, swore, warned the family of visitors, and even claimed to be an extra clever mongoose. The local newspaper dubbed him the mischievous and miraculous talking mongoose. But the horror is in the deception. Was Geff a pet, a spirit, or an extremely clever, long-running hoax perpetrated by the young daughter, Vori Irving? The family was absolutely certain he was real, but the physical evidence was always ambiguous. You feel a profound sense of exhaustion from the sheer noise of the entity. After the silence of Hinterkaifeck and the quiet composure of the Somerton man, the constant petty chatter of Geff is grating. You realize Geff is the antidote to the silent watcher. He is the loud tattler. He is not silent. He is constantly announcing his presence, mocking your every move, a verbal manifestation of fear. Researchers still argue whether the Geff phenomenon was a remarkable case of cryptozoology, a truly unique, sentient animal, or a textbook example of a trickster poltergeist, often associated with a child reaching puberty, or simply a deliberate, long-term family fraud designed to garner attention. The debate forces you to choose between the utterly impossible and the incredibly tedious. You hear Geff squeak a complaint about the lighting. You try to shush him, feeling a wave of nervous fatigue. You know, for an extra clever mongoose, you whisper, your first darkly humorous joke, he's got a surprisingly low-brow sense of humor, should be writing ciphers, not complaining about the dust. You remember the Bell Witch, who was a focused, powerful entity. Geff is just a chatty nuisance, the spirit world's equivalent of a terrible neighbor you can't get rid of. The obscure horror tidbit here is the belief in the trickster's exchange. This states that if you engage too much with a seemingly harmless trickster spirit like Geff, it will drain your ability to be sincere. It will replace your genuine thoughts with petty, sarcastic, and cynical pronouncements, making you an emotional echo of the entity itself. You rub your eyes, feeling the urge to snap back at the invisible mongoose. The exhaustion is making you irritable, just as the trickster wants. If he's so extra clever, you muse, a tired smirk crossing your face, why is he still living in the walls? He should be reviewing mortgages or running a hedge fund. Your second darkly humorous joke, a commentary on the lack of ambition in the supernatural world. You recall the grinning man's forced, happy voice. Geff is the inverse, a forced, irritable voice, but the same kind of unnerving, inescapable presence. You close your eyes, wanting the incessant chatter to stop. I'm going to tell him, you yawn, your voice dropping to a low rumble, that if he doesn't shut up, I'm going to call the Axeman of New Orleans and tell him there's a jazz-hating mongoose who needs to hear a trombone solo. Your third darkly humorous joke, a final, absurd threat combining two historical horrors. You leave the Isle of Man, the high-pitched chatter of Geff slowly fading, but the unsettling feeling of being constantly pettily mocked lingers in the quiet air. The annoying chatter of Geff the mongoose is abruptly silenced by the snapping and crackling of intense fire. You are no longer in the quiet, damp walls of the Isle of Man. You are in Fayetteville, West Virginia, on Christmas Eve, 1945, standing before the remains of a devastating house fire. This is the mainstream scary fact, the unsolved disappearance of the 5 Sodder children. The family home burned to the ground on Christmas Eve. The parents and 4 of the 9 children escaped. 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were never found. You are walking through the cold, ash-covered ruins. The horror is in the paradox. The fire was so intense it should have left something, anything. But after days of sifting, no bones, no dental remains, and no evidence of the 5 children were ever recovered. The fire department claimed the heat had completely cremated the bodies, but you remember the cases of spontaneous human combustion, SHC from Section 6. Even in cases of extreme internal combustion, some residue, a part of the backbone or foot, was left. Here, there was nothing, a total, clean disappearance. The parents, George and Jenny Sodder, believed their children were kidnapped before the fire was set. They maintained this belief for the rest of their lives, putting up a relentless public campaign, including a massive, haunting billboard to find their lost kids. You feel a profound, cold certainty lingering in the empty shell of the house. The children were not in the fire. They were taken. Researchers still argue whether the Sodder children's disappearance was a tragic but fully explained case of total incineration exacerbated by the structure of the house and the intensity of the fire, or if the lack of remains, coupled with eyewitness reports of a car near the house and phone lines being deliberately cut, points conclusively to a premeditated kidnapping and cover-up. The debate pits forensic science against the desperate hope of a bereaved family. The obscure horror tidbit here is the local Appalachian legend of the fire thief. This is a non-human entity, sometimes described as a small, quick shadow like the shadow person, that doesn't steal material goods but steals potential. The thief takes children, the future, by exploiting a sudden catastrophe like a fire or a flood, leaving no trace but the profound, lingering sense of loss. You recall the grinning man, always full of knowledge and unnerving cheer. Did he know where the children went? Was he the one who cut the phone lines, setting the stage for the theft? You look at the empty foundation, feeling the crushing weight of the unknown. It's a terrible case, you sigh, the weariness evident in your voice. But on the plus side, at least they didn't have to pay for a big, expensive funeral. Your first darkly humorous joke, a quiet, grim reference to the lack of remains, linking back to the SHC humor. Years later, a photo was sent to the parents, purportedly of one of their sons, Louis, now a grown man, living somewhere else. The photo was a final, terrible taunt, a last, cruel cipher, more frustrating than anything the Zodiac ever devised. You picture the parents, never able to move on, always looking for a sign. They had to live with the idea that the kids might be having a lovely time just somewhere else, you muse, running your hand along a cold piece of chimney brick. That's worse than knowing they died. Imagine the Christmas card dilemma. Your second darkly humorous joke, a commentary on the unique, prolonged torture of uncertainty. You leave the cold, empty ruins. The biggest failure of the fire thief, you conclude, feeling the final, heavy push of fatigue, is that he failed to deliver the victims back to their family. That's a serious lapse in customer service. Your third darkly humorous joke, a final, absurd complaint about the lack of closure. The cold certainty of the empty house follows you. The children are still nearby, perhaps, just elsewhere, somewhere you can't reach. The chill of the Sodder home's ruins and the smell of old ash fade away. You are completely still, finally settled, lying in your own bed, right where we found you in Section 8. The long night of whispers is ending, and you are drifting off. But then, the final, inevitable terror washes over you. It's the full circle moment, the last, chilling callback. You feel a weight on your chest, the distinct, familiar pressure of sleep paralysis. This time, you don't panic. You are too tired. You know the routine. You are utterly unable to move, your eyes wide in the dark. The shadow person, the entity of pure, formless malice. The physical manifestation of the silent watcher slides into view, slowly, deliberately. This is the entity you've been running from all night, the perfect silent observer that stood next to Elizabeth Short's final drink, watched the Dyatlov hikers run, and loomed in the Whitechapel fog. It is here to bid you good night. This is the final, chilling mainstream horror fact, the sense of imminent contact. The entity has crossed the threshold from observer to participant. Researchers still argue whether the sensation of being physically touched or kissed during a sleep paralysis episode is simply the brain misfiring in the wake-sleep transition, attempting to map phantom tactile sensations onto the visual hallucination, or if it represents a genuine yet unexplained psychological or non-physical interaction. Is this a final cold delusion or a final cold goodbye? You recall the grinning man's forced cheerfulness. This entity has no cheer, only a perfect, suffocating calm. It's the ultimate absence of personality, which is precisely what makes it so terrifying. The obscure horror tidbit for the final section is the concept of the final embrace. This fringe theory suggests that the shadow person isn't there to hurt you, but to absorb the fear and exhaustion you've accumulated over the night, the lingering psychic echo of every story we've told. It leans close to you, not to attack, but to take. It wants your final, complete surrender of peace. You can't move, you can't speak, you can only wait for the final touch. You realize the entity is the ultimate silent watcher house tenant. It is the one thing that will never leave, no matter where you move. You force a final, exhausted, mental joke. Well, I guess I should be flattered, you think. You voice a tiny, weary whisper in your mind. Out of all the people it could visit, it chose me, such a loyal audience member. Your first darkly humorous joke, a final acknowledgement of your role as the host of the macabre. The entity is so close now you can almost feel the lack of temperature radiating off it. It is pure cold, pure shadow. Honestly, you sigh, your final wave of fatigue crashing over you. If you're going to give me an existential crisis, at least make it snappy. I've got a busy morning. Your second darkly humorous joke, a tired complaint about the entity's lack of efficiency. The head of the shadow lowers. You feel a sensation on your forehead, a light, freezing pressure. It is the shadow person's kiss. It is the absolute quiet acceptance of your terror. The sensation is gone. The pressure on your chest lifts. Your muscles unlock. You are free. But the exhaustion is complete. You pull the blanket tight, staring into the dark. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You manage, your voice a dry, weary rasp. Especially if you enjoyed that little moment of personal attention. It means a lot to the algorithms. Your third and final darkly humorous joke, a meta-commentary on the eternal horror of being watched and judged. The night is over. The stories have been told. The silent watcher has left the room, carrying your exhaustion and your last remaining fragments of peace. All that is left is the silence and the profound, cold certainty that you will do this all again tomorrow night.